Hey, how's it going everyone? Welcome to part 2. And so before we start off here, let's go right back down to the Draw GUI event, because I did some testing in different games, different scenarios, and it turns out this display set GUI maximize, it may mess up your game depending on how you're using the Draw GUI. Change this up instead. And the cool thing is, instead of using image scale, we can actually trash all of the image scale logic and just scale the sprite and then just draw the transition from there. This will make this pretty easy. You don't really have to do any math. The math is all done here. And so what we're gonna need to do is create two variables. So we're gonna call this GUI W, and we're gonna use this built-in function called display get GUI height, width for W, and then GUI H for height. And so instead of getting the width and height of the entire room itself, we're just trying to understand what is being drawn to the player, get that width and height, and then do some math and stretch out the transition. So the next thing we're going to do here is say draw sprite and stretch ext for extended, because we want to add additional functions here, or different additional arguments I should say. So we're going to first put in here sprite index. So these are the different arguments this function takes in. Sprite sub image is the index of the image, and then the coordinates should be 0, 0, and then the width and height, and that's going to scale whatever we toss in. It'll be the width and height of the actual GUI that's displayed on screen. And then color can remain whatever the color is, unless you'd like to throw in some sort of other effects in there. And then alpha, as we mentioned, that's going to be our transparency. So let's put in these values here. I'm just going to go with C white for the color. It should leave the color alone. And then image alpha, whatever our image alpha is. So now the cool thing here is that instead of using the function that we had before, which may mess up your game, what we're doing is we're creating two variables, two instance variables here, and then we're drawing out the sprite, and then we're manipulating the sprite from there. So if we hit play, I just deleted the X and Y scale, but if we hit play, we're now transitioning to the new room. Wait, not exactly how we wanted, because we still have draw self here, which is showing up in the room. I just noticed that in the top left, and there you have it. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is, this is great and all, but now we need to understand how can we add additional logic here to account for other things other than trans fade in and out. So what we're going to do first is let's put in the trans circle in and out here. So the idea is we want a solid transition. We don't want it to fade in and out, but I'm going to put fade equals set to true just so you guys can see what that looks like. Here you go. And that doesn't look too good. That's because trans fade should be set to false. And there you go. Now we have another problem, and that problem is, well, now the transition appears to be looping, and that's because it is. Now in order to address this, what we need to do is we need to go to our obj trans object and create an animation end event. And then here we can say if the animation has ended, image speed is set to 0, so stop playing the image so it doesn't play again and again and again, or play the transition again and again and again. And then go down here and say image index. So now we want to control the frame that we're on, and say the frame that we want to be on is image number -1. And why are we saying image number -1? Well, the indexes start off as 0. So you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And realistically, when we're calling that function, let's go back here. When we're calling image number, it's just going to count all of the images. It's not going to include 0. It's not going to start at 0. So it's going to return 5. So it's going to return 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Realistically, we want to get 1, 2, 3, 4. We want to stop right here. So now if we hit play, and the animation worked, but It's kind of hard to see because I think the game, what happened was the animation played way too fast for us to react to it. So what I'm going to do is, let's go to room int. In room int, I'm just going to delete
obj trans.
And let's give the player the ability. So in the player, we're going to go to key pressed, and let's just choose enter for now. And I'm going to say instance create depth 0, 0 is fine. So in this particular function, we need an XY depth and then object. So XY depth, I'm going to go with -999, so that way it draws above everything else. A negative value draws above everything else. And then obj camera. So I'm going to give the player the ability to press enter, and then it'll create that object. Let's see if that works. Alright, so we're walking. I pressed enter, and I just realized we are not creating obj camera, we're creating obj trans. So that's a mistake. Alright, so we're walking, enter, and there you have it. So that's the whole transition in sequence. Now we want to add the transition out logic. And so before we do anything, we also want to go back to obj trans and make it persistent, because the idea here is we don't want the object to get destroyed or deleted upon leaving, entering a new room. We want it to continue to exist until it finishes its transition in, transition out. So if it's persistent, then that means the transition should live. In this case, are we killing? Yeah, we're not destroying the instance. So press enter, and now we transition to the new room, but nothing happens because the transition in has ended and it's stuck on the last frame, so it's drawing over everything else. So what we want to do here is type in fade out logic. I'm going to start off saying if trans in, so we're going to do something similar up here. So remember at line like 15 right here, we said transition in is now equal to blank. Once it's finished, we just blank it out. And so now we want to say if that condition is true, transition in is blank. However, transition out is not blank. Let's do some stuff. So the first thing we want to do, time out, decrement time out, so we can start our timer. And I'm going to start off saying if instance exists obj player. So I'm going to say if the player exists, then let's first figure out the player x, player y, and let's move them to a new coordinate. So obj player dot x equals player dot x, obj player dot y equals player underscore y. Okay, so that'll move the player to where the player needs to be. Next up, if sprite index does not equal trans out, we also want to play the transition. And I'm going to bring these over a little bit to make it look nice and clean. So same thing here. If the transition index is not the sprite that we want it to be, make it the sprite we want to be. So I'm going to say sprite index equals trans out. And since we stopped the image down here, we want to say image speed is equal to 1. And then image index. So we want to kind of reset the animation, and then it should kind of stop on its own. Lastly, we want to say, well, let's handle the fade in and fade out. Fade trans equals true. Image alpha is greater than 0. So now we're saying the same thing as up above here. If we're using fade in and fade out, well, then our image alpha should be somewhat transparent. It needs to be anything greater than 0. And then when starting the transition, it should be anything less than 1. So somewhat transparent. And then we can just do the opposite of what we're doing up here. Just going to copy and paste. So make it invisible. One more thing we need to do is account for the timeout. So let's copy this. So now once the timer has ended, we want to be able to time out, set trans out to blank, so it'll break this if statement entirely. And then instead of going to a new room, we're going to destroy ourselves. Instance destroy, you can put self or leave it blank. Now let's hit play. So now we're moving, I'm going to press enter, transition out, transition in. Now as you saw at the very end, it looks like that last frame was hanging for a second. So for example, if you wanted to do an extra second here, like 2 seconds, you're going to notice that the last frame is going to hang because it's going to be stuck on that frame. As you can see. So to address this, what we want to do is we want to go back to animation end event, and we want to say if sprite index is transitioning out, and we only want to do this if we're fading, or if our fading transition is false. Because if our fading transition is true, we can leave it alone. It should by default become invisible when it's done playing. So now we can move. I'm going to press enter. And it's going to hold our player for an extra second. Maybe you want to play a cutscene or something. And then we can move after the 2 seconds have run out. Okay. All right, so that's the transition in a nutshell. And so everything works perfectly fine now. Now the only thing left is we don't want to be able to create this object and hard code everything. We want to be able to just create the object somewhere in your game and then pass in the values. The easiest way to do that is actually to create a script, and then via one line of code, you call that script. That script will create this object and fill out its characteristics or variables, and then that will do everything on its own. Let's start off by going create script, and here we're going to call this scr trans. I'm going to go back to obj trans.
Copy all of these variables and then paste them into the script and then begin to make arguments.
And so this is going to be our reference point. Instead of equaling whatever values we want it to equal to, what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and create arguments. So for example, I'm going to use underscore trans in, for example, underscore trans out, for example, and now just replace transition in, transition out. Every variable that you want to have inside that object that has logic, you want to add it here. So trans in, trans out, underscore go room, for example, underscore time in. I'm going to take fade trans and put it at the end. Underscore fade x, underscore player x, underscore player y, and then fade trans at the end. Fade trans at the end because I want to default this to, you can default it to true or false, whatever you want. I'll default it to true. And there we have it. So now we have all of our arguments. And what do we need to do next? Well, let's first handle that fade in and fade out logic. So if underscore fade trans, so same as we had in the player object, we want to keep track of if this is a transition that's happening, the image should start off as alpha 0. So I'm going to say image underscore alpha equals 0. All right. Then next up, what we want to do here is, well, these are cool and all, but we're just setting the variables. We need to be able to assign it to an object. So the first thing that we want to do is say if instance underscore exists. I want to make sure that we don't have multiple obj trans objects created at once. You don't want to try to transition several times at once. So we're going to do this and say if obj doesn't exist, I'm going to put the not in front here. So if obj trans is not existent, then let's create it. So var, I'm going to call this tran. I'm going to create an object and reference it as a variable. So var tran instance create depth 0, 0. This is pretty much the same thing that's happening whenever we press enter with the player. So I'm going to go back. I'm just actually going to copy and paste this. And then next, what you want to do is, so now we have that reference. You're going to toss in that reference here, obj tran dot. Sorry, not obj tran dot, but just tran dot. And there you go. So now every time this script is run, what will happen is this script will say if the obj trans doesn't exist, then let's create it. We're going to have a shortcut, a reference to it. So a reference to this object, and then we're going to take that reference and define what it is, and that's pretty much it. And then the object itself will do all of the math. So now if you go back to obj player, we can go back to this here and say scr trans, and then as you see all these arguments here, we want to be able to put trans in, trans out. So I'm going to put here spr fade, for example, trans fade again, so fade in, fade out. What else do we have? Go to room, time in, time out, so rm2 60 60. We want the player to be at 200 by 200, and we're going to set our fade to true. Since this is a fade transition, we want that to be true. Let's hit play. We move around, enter, fade out, fade in, and now we can move. And so now we just have one line of code. Life is simple. I'm going to go ahead and create another key press event. This time let's do space. And we're going to toss in circle. Circle in, circle out. And there you go. This time we want fade to be false. Okay, enter. There you have it, transitions in a nutshell. Hopefully this made sense. You can rename this script whatever, or add it to an existing script you already have. Okay, and so back in obj trans, we don't need this anymore, this fade trans alpha logic, because it's happening in the script itself. If you want to take it a step further, what we can do inside the script itself, we can, in case if the user is passing in, instead of just like an asset, they're passing in some sort of string, we can add some logic to catch that string and look for the object that has that name. Let's just put an enter there. We want to use another function called asset underscore get index. And then you can toss in the name of that index. It should find an ID and then properly reference whatever asset you're looking for. So instead of tossing in like spr trans circle in, for example, if the player were to go here and toss in some sort of string, because you may have this in your game in some instances, you may be like go to room and then some sort of string or something like that. spr trans fade will now read as an index ID. It'll now take that string and try to find an asset for it, take that asset and then feed it back to the object. So the same exact thing should happen. I'm gonna hit play in a second. And you just want to do that for these three variables here, because these are actually taking assets. And as you see, the same exact logic works. Now, instead of tossing in just an asset, we're tossing in a string. And then same thing for room 2. So I press enter. There you go.
that is the transition system. Hopefully you guys learned something from this. Let me know if you guys have any questions, and until next time.